And what I want to talk to you tonight is on actually the thing that I believe we should actually be really looking for. And it's called the spirit of Antichrist. I spoke on this about 6 years ago, I think, 6 or 7 years ago. And what happened as I kind of came across this and began to study it, sometimes whenever you're speaking, there are different things that you can kind of do as a preacher. For me, there's preaching where you're able just to get a scripture and you just go for it and you just preach on that scripture, and I enjoy doing that there because it's just, it's stories, it's connecting things, it flows. But then there's teaching, which is what we're doing now. So there's not so much preaching tonight and what we do on Sunday nights. A lot of it is teaching. And then sometimes it can be very prophetic. And I remember in 2016, sitting by a pool in Spain. And it was actually whenever the vote was taking place for Brexit. And then later on that year, there was going to be an election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And I remember sitting, and I would always, it's a great time just to be able to relax and to read some books and just to pray and try and gather your thoughts. I remember sitting, and I just got this overwhelming sense of the presence of God, and of God just speaking to me, and having this fear, not so much a fear's not, but just a bigger awareness of Brexit and of the elections that were to come in America at that time, and how much it meant for the future of various things within Europe, within the context of Europe and within the context of America. And we know how divisive those elections became, and we're not going to get political about this here, but what this will do, the spirit of Antichrist, will help us understand what's going on behind the scenes. And so there are times whenever you bring a word and it's very prophetic, and this for me was a prophetic word. The difficulty with prophecy, though, is that whenever you're speaking and you're preaching, you're given a prophetic word. Very often it doesn't mean anything until it happens. So Daniel has these prophecies that we have read about, and he says this is what's going to happen in the future, but it doesn't mean anything until it actually happens. And so this I preached about 6 years ago, and so you will have the notes that I have here that may not mean a heck of a lot to you until we actually go through it. But what I decided to do was I decided to write a book on it as well. And so I've been in the process of doing that. The book will probably never be published because I'm a great one for starting things and for not finishing things. And so I kind of wrote this. So there will be two things that will be emailed to you, the notes and the book. And the book was written 5 or 6 years ago. I added a little bit to it last March, April time, whenever we had nothing else to do. But 95% of what you have contained within the book was written six years ago. So anything that I say today is from 6 years ago that we have never really gone back on. In fact, there's actually a DVD not a DVD, but a CD, I think, of the original preaching at the back there called The Spirit of Antichrist. Okay, so enough for the background. If you've got your Bibles, these will be in your notes anyway. 1 John chapter 2 and verse 18. John says this, he says, "Little children, it is the last hour." And again, remember, John is writing these words 2,000 years ago. So 2,000 years ago, John tells whoever he's writing to, he's telling them, we're living in the last hour. So people were believing back then, I think even John would have believed, this is the last generation. This is the generation that will see the return of Christ. That was 2,000 years ago. So let's not get caught up in, I know and I believe that we're living in the last days. But I also live with an awareness that 2,000 years ago, John was telling people this is the last hour. I think that we're down to the last minute of the last hour, and that if ever there was a time for Jesus to return, it is now. He says, "Little children, it's the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come, by which we know that it is the last hour. One of those antichrists that John was probably referring to would have been Nero, the Roman emperor who set Jerusalem on fire, set Rome on fire. There's a saying, I think it's like Rome burned while Nero fiddled, and he blamed the Christians and used that there as an opportunity to attack Christians and to have them martyred and put to death for their faith. So John is saying it's the last hour. You've heard that the Antichrist is coming. Even now, we've already had many Antichrists, by which we know it is the last hour. 1 John chapter 2, verse 22, then he goes on just a few verses later and he says, who is a liar, but he who denies that Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. He is Antichrist who denies the Father and the Son. 2 John chapter 1 verse 7 says, for many deceivers have gone out into the world who do not confess Jesus Christ as coming in the flesh. This is a deceiver and an Antichrist. John is the only person who uses the term Antichrist. No one else in the Bible uses the name or the term Antichrist. John is the only one. But there are many references to the Antichrist. Some of them we will have already looked at. Matthew 24 and verse 5 says, Jesus says, many will come in my name claiming I am the Messiah and will deceive many. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 3 says, don't let anyone deceive you in any way, for that day will not come until the rebellion occurs and the man of lawlessness is revealed. He's talking about the Antichrist. He doesn't use the name Antichrist. He uses the man of lawlessness is revealed, the man doomed to destruction. 2 Corinthians 11 verses 14 to 15 says, for Satan himself is transformed into an angel of light. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also be transformed as the ministers of righteousness. That is such a crucial verse, because we think, whenever we think of Satan, we have this image in our heads of what Satan looks like, and it wouldn't be a very nice picture, nice image that we would have. But what Paul is saying is actually, he will disguise himself as an angel of light. And his ministers, who we know as demons, can also disguise themselves as ministers of light. And that's how people get deceived. Revelation 13 verses 16 to 17, he caused all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or on their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that has the mark. Shared with you before, I think, in these times that we've had together, the word anti. Whenever we think of the word anti, we often think of something that is against. So if you're anti-war, then you are against war. If you're anti-Spurs, then you're against Spurs. So we have this understanding of what anti means in regards to being against something. But anti also means in place of, not just against something, but also in place of. So the Antichrist is anti-Christ. He is against everything that Christ is. He is against everything that Christ says he is, everything that his character, his nature, everything that you know about Jesus. The Antichrist is the complete opposite of Jesus Christ. But he is also there to set himself in place of Jesus Christ. So you have got to really be aware of that. This is so key as we move on and looking at this here, is that he will establish himself as an angel of light, as a man of peace, as a person of peace, to deceive many and to set himself up in the place of Jesus Christ. And that is so crucial that we understand that there. So he will set himself up in place of God in the temple of Jerusalem, which we have already talked about. He will set himself up as a man of peace. He will control a one-world system of government, of economy, and religion. He will author a peace agreement between Israel and Palestine for 7 years. And after 3.5 years, he will reveal his true colors, and all hell will break loose on this earth. My biggest question, and this is where I kind of started to look at this here, because my biggest concern, my biggest thought, my biggest, what I was really kind of consumed with and trying to understand and trying to figure out and trying to come to terms with. Whenever it talks about the mark of the beast and talks about a one-world system of economy, of government, of religion, of all of this stuff that the Bible tells us is going to happen, how exactly is that going to happen? And are people not going to know? Surely the goodness, and this is like me thinking as a kid way back in the 80s, in the late 80s, surely to goodness, people are going to know it's the mark of the beast and they're not going to take it. How is this all going to happen? And this is where the spirit of Antichrist comes in. And so this is the thing that I think that we need to be looking at and looking out for and watching out for. And so we're going to look at some evidence that I believe we have today that shows us that the spirit is loose in our world today, that the spirit is on the loose. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12, you will know this verse, that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and wickedness in high places. And what that verse is saying, what Paul is talking about spiritual warfare, as he's talking to the Ephesians, and he's telling us to put on this armor. It's a spiritual armor to protect us from spiritual attacks. And so we've got to recognize that we are in a spiritual battle. Everything that we are a part of, everything that we do it's a spiritual war that we are actually a part of. The issue is we can't see the war. We can't see what's going on. If God could rip apart the heavens and allow us to see into that spiritual realm, then we would see a war taking place between the demons of hell and the angels of heaven, between those that have fallen, those that have been kicked out of heaven, and those that are still with Christ in heaven, between the demons and the angels. We would see an actual war taking place. But what happens is, and whenever we come to looking at the book of Revelation, you've got this spirit realm. And so whenever John has these visions of what's taking place in heaven, he sees white horses and red horses and black horses and pale horses and bowls being poured out. That's what he's seeing in heaven. But what he sees in heaven is actually then a reference to what is taking place on this earth. So there is a spiritual war that is taking place. It has been taking place since the birth of time. But that spiritual war is not contained to the spiritual realm. That spiritual war is actually played out on this earth. So a lot of stuff I see going on in our world today is actually the result, the physical result, the physical playing out of what is taking place in the spirit realm. Does that make sense? Yeah? We okay? Okay. So 1 John chapter 4 and verse 3 says, every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is not of God. This is the spirit of Antichrist, which you have heard was coming and is now already in the world. 1 John chapter 4 verse 3. John is talking about a spirit, the spirit of Antichrist, which you've heard was coming, but is already now in the world. Again, this is 2,000 years ago John is writing these words. So John is writing to the churches, and he's telling the Christians, he's saying, you've heard there's a spirit of Antichrist that's coming, but you know what? It's already here. It's already here. This is 2,000 years ago. What I'm seeing today, one of the reasons why I believe we're living in the end times, for those of us that watch sports, the thing about sports is the most intense period of a game, especially whenever it's close and it's a big game, is the last 5 minutes. You know, you have Manchester City who are getting beat by Chelsea 1-0 last night, and it intensifies as the game moves on. And the reason that it intensifies is because the team that's getting beat knows they're running out of time. And they've got to get things straightened up here, get a goal before the final whistle is blown. So last night, I don't know where they got 7 minutes from, but he got 7 minutes of added time, and the crowd goes crazy because they know we've got 7 minutes here to get a goal. And things intensify. And so John has been writing and he's saying it's the last hour. But I think we're living in the last minute of that last hour. We're in injury time. And things are intensifying in this world. And so John says there's a spirit of Antichrist loose in the world today. The difference between the spirit of Antichrist and the Antichrist is that the Antichrist is a person and the spirit is a spirit. Throughout the Bible, there are various references to different spirits. One of the perhaps the most famous that people, if you've been in church for any length of time, then you will have heard of the spirit of Jezebel. It comes from King Ahab and Jezebel and Elijah. And so the New Testament talks about a spirit of Jezebel, a controlling, manipulating spirit. Sometimes men have twisted this here and made it look like female preachers carry a spirit of Jezebel. That is not the case. A man can carry the spirit of Jezebel as much as any woman can. This is not about man or woman, male or female. This is about a spirit. And so the spirit of Antichrist is a spirit. But the role, write this down or it'll be in your notes, this is crucial. The role of the spirit of Antichrist is to create the proper environment that is conducive for the real person to come in. Let me say that to you again. The role of the spirit of Antichrist is to create the proper environment for the real person to come in. So whenever I'm asking this question all those years ago about how is this all going to happen, how is this all going to take place where people will take this mark and where we'll have this, people will buy into this one world economy and one world government and one world religious system? The answer is with the spirit of Antichrist, because the spirit is creating the proper environment that is conducive for the real person to come. In other words, what it is doing, what this spirit is doing, is manipulating and controlling and changing the environment, which we're going to look at in just a second, changing people's opinions, changing the environment, changing the culture, changing laws, so that at some point, whenever the Antichrist comes in and says, hey, let's do this and let's do this and let's do this, the ground is already set. Remember how anti means opposed to and also in place of, and everything that the Antichrist does is a reflection, is some kind of a mirror image of who Jesus is and what God is and who God is. So last week we talked about you have Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Within Revelation 13, you've got the dragon, which is Satan, and you've got two beasts. You've got the first beast, that is the Antichrist, and you've got the second beast, that is the one world religious leader. So you've got a trinity there of Satan, of the Antichrist, and of the religious leader. And so whenever it comes to this, you have John the Baptist, whose role was to prepare the way for Jesus Christ. John the Baptist understood this is my role. My role is the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord. And so a mirror image of that is you have a spirit of Antichrist that is preparing the way for the real Antichrist to come in, where the ground will already be set, where the culture will already be set, that will welcome him. We talked about how society and communities and cities and nations will not only welcome him, but they will worship him. How will that happen? The spirit of Antichrist has created the environment for this to all happen and for this to all take place. Daniel chapter 6. I was just thinking about this last week or the week before. Daniel chapter 6, it's the den of lions. And what happens is we have this account of Daniel, and it says that, so what has happened, you've got the Babylonians have been overthrown by the Medes and the Persians. And so there's a new guy in charge. Nebuchadnezzar's gone. And you've got this guy called Darius the Mede. So the Medes and the Persians are taking control here. And it says that he set up 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom with 3 administrators over them. One of them was Daniel. This is how far Daniel had rose to prominence within this kingdom down through the years. And they were made accountable to them so the king might not suffer loss. Now Daniel, verse 3, so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. So look at how far Daniel has risen here. The king recognizes him and wants to set him and establish him over everything. Kind of similar to Joseph, where Pharaoh appointed Joseph as ruler over all of his affairs. He was like second in command. But other people, the other satraps and the administrators, they get jealous of Daniel. And so what they do is they go to Darius and they say to Darius, because they know of what kind of a man Daniel is. And so they go to Darius and they conspire for Darius to change a law, to make a law where people are not allowed to worship their God, where they must worship Darius. And they're not allowed to worship their God. And they go to Darius, and Darius writes this law. And the thing about the Medes is that once a law is written, it can't be unwritten, it can't be changed. Even Darius himself, who writes the law, who's in charge, he can't change this law. And so Daniel, in verse 10, learns of the decree that has been published. He's not allowed to go and to pray to his God. But what he does, what we know is the story from, I'm sure from our Sunday school days, is that Daniel goes up to his room in the same way that he had always done, opens his windows and prays to God. Because they couldn't find anything against him, they conspired and had the laws changed so that Daniel couldn't pray and worship his God. And Daniel decides, you know what? I'm called to obey my God. And that for me, and so he goes up and he opens the windows and he prays and he continues to do what he had always been doing. Over the last year, we have been forced to close our doors. And I don't want to say too much, but churches have been forced to close their doors. And for me personally, I expected better, maybe better is not the right word, but different leadership. And we are, I was kind of preached to by someone in leadership, talking about churches closing and about how that we should be like Joseph, who went along with things. The thing about Joseph is Joseph was a slave and he had to. But Joseph's faith was never brought into question. Daniel's was, and so my thing was, well, is Daniel not a better example? Where whenever Daniel is brought into Babylon, and they're brought this food at the start of Daniel, it's the king's food, and Daniel says, we're not going to eat this food. There were things that Daniel went along with. We will learn the Babylonian language, we will learn the Babylonian ways, we will do all this here, but this food we're not going to touch, and they wouldn't defile themselves by eating the king's food. And there's this conversation that goes on, and the guy who's bringing them the food says, okay, we're going to give it a few weeks. I think Daniel said, give us a week or two, let's see how this goes. And they looked better at the end of the 2 or 3 weeks for the fruit and the vegetables that they were eating and not eating the food from the king's table. And so there were things that Daniel said, you know what? I can't go with this. My job is to worship God. And you can write a law that will ban me from doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to meet. And I believe that God, obviously, was with him in all of this. He's put into the den of lions and he's removed from that. The lions don't attack him. And I say that because what is happening now is that laws are changing. I'm sure you've all seen the videos, even over the last couple of weeks. You've got this 70-year-old man preaching on the streets. He's on a step ladder, just a couple of steps up, and he's telling people about Jesus. And these 2 police come, and this one guy actually grabs him and pulls him off the steps that he's standing on because he's preaching about Jesus. This is happening in England. And a 70-year-old man pulled down off the steps. And then you've got this other video where the police have brought Muslims together on the Tower Bridge, to be able to preach and to do whatever it is that they're doing on that bridge. Listen, I've got nothing against Islam, but what I do have an issue with is the hypocrisy in it all. And what I'm seeing today is Christians being, in some way, I don't want to yet use the word persecuted, but that's what it's leading to, and we're going to look at some in just a second, but that's what it's leading to. Laws are being changed. There's currently an argument between Poland and Brussels because the laws that Brussels is imposing on the nation of Poland, and Poland is saying, you know what, we're not going to follow those laws. We want to have the freedom, and it's very similar to Brexit, where we want to be able to have our own laws. Okay, so let me get back to this. So what's happening, and what I can see and what I have seen over the last number of years, has been a change in culture, a change in society, a change in laws. And it's happening more in America and more in Europe, but there's more of a war going on in America with this, between Democrats and Republicans, between liberals and conservatives, where conservative laws are being attacked, challenged, and changed by Democrats. And again, I don't want to get political, but unfortunately, this is where it all happens. It happens in political streams. It happens in the halls of politics. And so there is an environment that is being created for the Antichrist to come in and to have his way. Let me just look at a few different bits of evidence, and then we can have a few questions, okay? And this will all be in your notes, and you can read what I have sent you. And if you have any questions, then please, I would like some feedback on what I've sent you, and any questions, then send them back. The first thing is evolution. So the Bible teaches that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Evolution replaces God. Evolution both teaches against God, but also replaces the creation story, the account of creation in the Bible. And so we can see how that this is being used to get rid of God. So let me break down evolution for you very, very quickly. And I was actually watching this yesterday morning. Professor Brian Cox. And I was watching him yesterday morning, and these are his words, and I'll try and get through this quickly because I've got a bit to get through, and I want to get finished in about 15, 20 minutes. So these are his words whenever it comes to evolution. He talks about these two little atoms, or whatever they were spinning around in space, and in some way, after billions of years of spinning around in space. Now, don't forget, evolutionists teach that this all was created, this universe was created out of nothing. But yet, you've got these two atoms. So it's not nothing for a start. But they don't know where they came from. In fact, his words yesterday were, there is no mechanism to measure how the Big Bang started. But what he says is, there were these two atoms floating about in space. And don't forget, space is billions and billions and billions and billions of light years apart. And yet, for some reason, in all of this space, they found each other, they collided, they exploded, and out of that explosion, life began to form. And what he said, these are all his words. You can go and watch it for yourself. What he said was, these are the things, because as I'm watching it, I started to get annoyed. Because the things that he was saying, and I'm like, are you listening to yourself? The things that he was saying actually, for me, backed up creation more than it did evolution. So one of the things that he said is that the environment had to be perfect for this creation to happen, for this universe to exist. He says that the conditions and the environment had to be absolutely perfect. So we are something like 93 billion light years away from the sun, the Earth. 93 billion light years away from the sun. If we are just a few degrees closer to the sun, then it's too hot and the Earth can't exist. Life can't exist on Earth. If we're just a few degrees away from the sun, it's too cold and we can't exist. He talked about gravity, that gravity, again, if gravity was just a little bit more or a little bit less, then life wouldn't be sustained on this earth. And there are so many factors that he goes through that all had to be, and his words were, perfect for this creation, for this world to exist, for this earth to exist. And I'm thinking, right, is that not like full-on chance that this has all happened? He goes on and he says, yes, it is, a little bit later on. And he's got these two guys because he likens it to, what he's trying to say is he likens it to making a samurai sword or to making something. And he says, and he's got these two guys that are making a samurai sword. And he's got this fire that's burning. And he says the conditions within the fire have to be perfect for the samurai sword to be made. And I'm watching TV and I'm like, okay, the conditions are right in the fire. But you've got two guys that are actually making the sword. And I get really annoyed. I'm like, come on ahead, Bran. So these guys actually have to make the sword. They created the conditions for them to create the sword. And then he goes on and he says, and this is his question. He talks about these rules and these laws for this to exist. And his question was, who controls the laws? Who looks after the laws? Who made the laws? That was his question. Who makes the laws? And I'm like, listen to yourself, Brian. Listen to the question that you're asking. Because his answer was, it all happened by chance. He said it was just like a lottery, and we just happened to win the lottery. He talked about infinite universes, and we just happened to win the lottery. I was sharing with my dad today, we were talking about this here, and I said, you know what, see the next time that I'm talking about, if I ever am in a debate with an evolutionist and we're in front on stage or whatever, because part of evolution is that through billions of years that we started off as a slime, we were in the water, we were like fish, and then the fish jumped out of the water and grew legs on the land, and over billions of years, evolution took place. And so I'm just going to bring a goldfish with me, throw it down on the table and wait for the legs to grow. So listen, if people want to believe in evolution, okay. But here's my issue now with the theory of evolution. And every time that Brian Cox is speaking, he says, these are theories, but he teaches them as fact. And science always has to, in order for something to be taken and to be accredited and approved and authorized, it has to be measurable. So you have to measure the beginning, the middle, and the end. You have to measure the results. And he said himself, there is no mechanism that we can measure evolution. So everything is a theory. He talks about these theories. So my issue is, why are they being taught as fact in schools? For me, I see the spirit of Antichrist at work, where it's teaching children something that replaces God. Another evolutionist, I'll not get into him too much, is Richard Dawkins. And because of his evolutionary theories and beliefs, that Richard Dawkins now makes statements where he says that children with Down syndrome can be killed. It's going to get worse whenever we start to talk about abortion. But that's his belief. The children with Down syndrome says, do them a favor and kill them and go start again. That's an evolutionist for you. And so my issue is, if you want to believe that, okay, you've got the freedom of choice to believe that there. But why are we teaching it as fact in schools? A couple of months ago, my youngest, Eli, 10 years of age, came home with a homework about the Victorians. So he's learning about the Victorians. And within this sheet of paper that he was given, there was like this timeline through history to kind of show that the Victorians were, I don't know, it was like 1800s or something like that there. But it's like this timeline that's set out on this sheet of paper, and you have to match up the timeline. That you've got these dates, and you put this picture with the right time, with the right year, the decade, the century. And right at the very start is a picture of a dinosaur. So I says, Eli, we're not putting that in. And I sent the teacher a message saying, I'm not playing this game. I'm not playing this game. And I get angry about it. I do get very angry, and just wait till we get till biology in secondary school in the boys' model. Because I'm not going to be silent. Listen, it's the biggest load of bull. It really is. It really is. I get angry, so I'm going to move on. So listen, if you want to believe it, but why is it being taught as fact in our schools? And that for me is the big question. And that for me is where I believe that the spirit of Antichrist comes in, because it is influencing young people. It is influencing children. And there's a lot worse being taught in schools in Canada, in America, where you have drag queens that are being brought in to preschools to teach nursery rhymes. then there's a lot worse going on. The next one, let me talk about abortion. There's a couple of things here that I'm going to talk about that I know they're very, very, very sensitive issues, and so I tread carefully with these issues. But let me hurry up with this here. Again, this is all evidence that we look at that is showing that there is a change in culture, a change in environment, where the Antichrist can come in. These are figures from a number of years ago. The total number of abortions in 2013, this is in Great Britain, was 185,331. 0.1% more than in 2012. These are, whenever you're looking at your notes, they are, I think, England and Wales figures. Ground E abortions, 2,732 were carried out under Ground E, risk that the child would be born handicapped. My sister, Paula, whenever she was pregnant with Ellie, was given the option of an abortion because they knew that Ellie was going to have Noonan syndrome, that she was going to struggle in life. And so they came to Paula and they said, look, we think you should abort this pregnancy. Paula obviously said no. And we've got a pain in the backside little niece who rules the roost. But the wee girl is thriving. She's alive because we believe in a God of life. She had at one stage 5 things wrong with her heart. She was in hospital more times than we'd had hot dinners, especially in those early years, and concerning times because you didn't know what was going to happen, and a lot of tears shed during those times of being in hospital and of going through that. There, she has still to eat anything. She's still fed with gets hooked up to a machine, and years later, because she's so stubborn that she won't eat anything. But God has been so gracious in all of that, and it just shows that what could have been, what is now, and we just see God's grace in it all. But people are given this option, because your baby is going to have Down syndrome, then it should be aborted. I don't think that's right. According to the World Health Organization, again, this is 6 years ago, every year in the world there are an estimated 40 to 50 million abortions. 125,000 abortions per day right around the world. In the USA, where nearly half of pregnancies are unintended, 4 in 10 are terminated by abortion. People will use an argument that, there could be a life at risk. The child's life could be at risk. The mother's life could be at risk. I know there was a big case down in the Republic of Ireland a few years ago where there was a woman who died as a result of that there. And then they take that one case and they apply it, okay, so let's just have an abortion whenever we feel like it. And so what is happening is you have all of these millions of abortions, and probably less than 1% are actual issues where there were lives at risk. 95%, I think, is the figure, that it's just an unintended pregnancy, didn't mean to get pregnant, can't look after it, let's just abort it. And so what is happening is, whenever we talk about abortion, is that it's a changing culture and a changing environment that basically says this is okay. And that's the point that we're getting to, where we become so desensitized to what is happening that we become okay with it. There's a theory. I don't know if anybody has ever tried this. I don't know how true it is. But there's a theory that if you put a frog into a pot of boiling water, then the frog is obviously going to jump out of that boiling water. But that if you put it into a pot of cold water, then you slowly bring the water to the boil, that the frog will not jump out because it's not recognizing that the water is beginning to overheat and it's going to boil and it's in the water. And I think that that's what's happening in society today, is that there have been so many changes down through the years that we have become desensitized to things, and that culture and society has become desensitized to things. And so people have this opinion about abortion. Well, it's just a fetus. It's not a real baby. And I thank God today for 3D images that show babies in the womb. The issue with whenever we begin to step beyond the boundaries of God, the issue for me becomes that there becomes no boundaries. And so what we have happening today, we say, okay, you know what? You've got this court case that happened in America a number of years ago, Roe v. Wade, that made it legal for abortions to take place. And then what you have happen is we become, down through the years, desensitized. We've got 40 to 50 million abortions per year throughout the world. I think I shared this, what I'm about to share with you, a number of weeks ago. Because once you step over that boundary, then anything goes. Once God, whenever He created us with rules and regulations. Rules are a good thing. Rules are a good thing. Rules are there to protect us and keep us from harm. And so once you break beyond that boundary, then anything goes. And so it's not enough to say, well, it's going to be only in the first 8 weeks that an abortion can take place. It moved from 8 weeks to 12 weeks. It moved from 12 weeks to 16 weeks to 24 weeks. It moved to a point where a baby can be aborted at a stage where other babies have been born and have survived. I've seen videos of babies born at 24, 26, 28 weeks where they could be aborted, and I've seen them born, grow, and survive. And yet we're told we can abort that. It goes beyond the 24 weeks to now, and listen, look this up for yourself. Don't take my word for it. I want you to Google at some point post-birth abortion. I've shared this with you before, post-birth abortion. This is how far this spirit of Antichrist will take culture and society. Post-birth abortion basically is saying that you're not a real person until you're able to look after yourself. And they would say, give an age of around 9 years of age. And so what people believe now is that they call it abortion, still don't call it murder, is that any child up to 9 years of age, they believe can be killed, can be aborted, because it can't look after itself. That's how far this spirit goes. That's how far it takes us. And so there is this change. We've got this thing called euthanasia. Again, this is from 6 years ago, so these numbers will be probably added to. 60,000 last year in Belgium alone euthanized. So people who are saying, you know what, I don't want to live anymore, and I want to end my life. And they'll go to places like Belgium and Holland where there are these centers that you can go in and you can end your life. It's called euthanasia. The problem is, again, whenever you overstep those boundaries, once you break that boundary, is one 24-year-old in Belgium was granted permission simply because she didn't want to live anymore. 24-year-old and depressed, don't want to live anymore. Okay, come on in. We'll sort you out. And life is ended. God is a God of life. He breathed life into the nostrils of Adam. He gave us His Spirit. He breathed His Spirit in us. And He gave us life. He is a life-giving God. John chapter 10, verse 10 says that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy. But I have come that you might have life. It's Jesus speaking. He's a God of life. Therefore, the spirit of Antichrist is about death. But see how it gets dressed up as medical care? And so now we live in this place where, you know, like I say, if you want to believe in evolution, okay. If you want to believe in abortion, that's your right, that's your choice. If you want to believe in euthanasia, that's okay, that's your choice. But what has now happened, and this is where there has been such a shift in culture, is that for me to stand on this platform and say, I believe, let's talk about marriage for a second. I believe in the biblical view of marriage between a man and a woman, that marriage is supposed to be between a man and a woman. That is now what my dad was referring to this morning as a toxic theology. And we see how the culture has changed so that it's not on any longer that it's, you can have your opinion and I can have mine. We're now living in an era, and we'll maybe pick up on this again next week. We're now living, in fact we will because we've got a bit more to say. We're now living in an era, and a culture, and a society that will vilify me and persecute me and attack me because I have a biblical viewpoint on certain issues. And we can see it especially in America. It's coming, we can see it a little bit in England, in London, and a little bit of it here, and it will grow here. But more so in America, there is a war going on because there is a liberal agenda, and then there is the conservatives, and they are at war with each other, and over things like this. And now you've got this thing called cancel culture, and this wokeness that is talked about, and we'll maybe pick up on this next week. And so what I can see now is a change in culture, where Christian perspectives, biblical perspectives. Remember how we started this theology thing way back at the start of the year, or last year, I think, whenever it was. And I think it was last year. And we looked at our world view and where we get our world view from. And my world view, how I look at the world, my perspectives, my opinions, my beliefs come from the Bible, not from the culture around me or the society around me. It has to come from the Bible. It has to come from the Word of God. And so we as Christians, we've got to decide, are we going to be Daniels and are we going to stand on the Word of God? Or are we going to be subjected and succumb to the pressures put on us? Because that, I believe, is going to increase. I preached a message a number of years ago called Decrease the Grey. And it's about where Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Because what you'll see in your notes when I talk about homosexuality, and I also talk about universalism. Because universalism basically teaches that all roads lead to God. That it doesn't matter what religion you're a part of, what God you believe in, it's all ultimately the same God anyway. And they describe this mountain and all of these roads leading up. And this is where the one world religion will come into play. Because the one world religion will teach us, and is already teaching us, it doesn't matter what God you believe in, what God you worship or you serve, it's all the same God, and all roads lead to that God, whatever name you want to give him, be it Yahweh, be it Allah, be it Buddha, it doesn't matter, it's all the same. And Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but by me. And I think I preached that again about 6 years ago. And I said, there's going to come a time whenever I will not be able to preach that message without being put into prison. The issue I had was I didn't realize just how quickly that those days would come. And this thing is gaining momentum and gaining speed. Let me just give you these other two. So that's universalism. You can have a look at that there. Let me touch on, and again, I know this is a sensitive issue, but let me talk on the whole homosexuality thing. And I want to underline that I know people who are gay. I know people who are homosexuals, and we've got absolutely no issues whatsoever, because my view is that God died for everybody, and I will in no way hate anybody or discredit anybody because of their lifestyle. That whenever I see someone, then I see someone who Jesus died for. But here's the issue that I have, is that the spirit of Antichrist is creating an environment to discredit Christianity, to discredit biblical viewpoints. And this is a quote from people who are, because it's not. There are people who are struggling with their lifestyle, and you're trying to come to terms with it and really struggling with this here. But there are these groups that are really hammering this issue and using this as a way to discredit Christianity. And why is it, that if someone comes to me now and says, I think I'm gay, that I'm not allowed to pray for that person, say, no, you're not. That's not the way God created you. That's becoming illegal here In America, it's worse. In California, if you have a child that's 4, 5, 6 years of age, 7, 8, 9, 10 years of age, if you have a child who's still not an adult, who's under 18, and your child comes to you as a parent and says, and it's a male child, and your male child says, I'm female, you're not allowed to say to your boy, to your son, no, you're not, you're a boy. That's actually illegal for a parent to do that in California at the minute. A parent will be taken to court and has been taken to court. It's already happened. This is what's happening in California, in the state of California at the minute. Parents are being taken to court over this here. Listen to this quote. Homosexual activists don't want the white picket fence. They want to burn down the white picket fence. The end game is not to achieve so-called marriage equality, but rather to render marriage reality meaningless. This is a quote from those homosexual activists. So there are activists out there who are there to discredit Christianity, to discredit the Word of God. Masha Gessen, a lesbian journalist, activist, and author, expressly admitted this fact in a 2012 interview with ABC Radio. This is what she says. It's a no-brainer that homosexuals should have the right to marry, she said. But I also think equally that it's a no-brainer that the institution of marriage should not exist. So she's saying, on the one hand, we're fighting for marriage equality, but it's also, you know what? We're not interested in marriage. We don't even think marriage should exist. Fighting for gay marriage generally involves lying about what we are going to do with marriage when we get there, because we lie that the institution of marriage is not going to change, and that's a lie. This is them, and she's actually admitting to lying. Homosexual activist and pornographer Clinton Fein echoes Gessen's candid sentiments. Demand the institution of marriage and then wreck it. This is what he's writing. Demand the institution of marriage and then wreck it. He once wrote, James Dobson was right about our evil intentions, he quipped. We just planned to be quicker than he thought. And listen, you can read through those quotes and you can make up your own minds about what is written there. This is these guys. So what is actually happening here is that there are people who are struggling with their sexuality, and they're actually being used by these gay activists. The Gay Liberation Front have a website, and they actually talk about one of their aims and objectives is to destroy Christianity, the beliefs of Christianity. That's on their website. Black Lives Matter. Go on the Black Lives Matter website. There's a lot of stuff on the Black Lives Matter website that has nothing to do with Black Lives Matter and has a lot to do with discrediting Christianity. We don't know this stuff because we don't research it. Listen, Black Lives Matter, 100%. 100%. But there is a movement taking place that is anti-God and that is anti-Christian. And we need to be aware of the spirit that is at work behind the scenes.